Welcome! My name is Gentiana Ramadani and I'm here to share something that you already know. Media freedom is under attack. As the COVID-19 pandemic has brought an unprecedented challenge for all societies, it seems that in Balkan countries, many undemocratic figures have risen to the surface together with the socio-economic crisis. The pandemic itself did not bring about the weakening of democracy. No, it only highlighted the weak institutions and increased the appetite of leaders for more power and dominion. Poor-performing democracies like in these countries raise the questions about the impact of COVID-19 on media sector in times of flourishing the authoritarian regime. Many governments have used the pandemic as reason to legitimately or illegitimately heighten existing state censorship practices or introduce new practices entirely under the justification of stopping false information about the virus. Media face the lack of information at a time when the government was the only source of information. Nobody would speak, neither physicians nor the teachers. The representatives of public institutions would not provide answers because they were monitored by the heads of state. While facing a situation of pressure and lack of information, the question here is, how did this pressure look like in practice? How have the government responses to COVID-19 impacted the democratic standards, specifically those related to media freedom? Well, journalists around the Balkan shared their concerns.
Having people's interest in mind and checking the information, correctly checking everything we put on air was a challenge, and also at the same time an extra effort to break somehow the wall of controlled information by the government, health ministry and doctors and health experts who, before talking to the media, they had to get authority or kind of authorization by the state officials and their superiors. This was done mainly not only as it usually happens in hybrid democracies, that controlling the information in times of pandemic, or as the officials here in Albania like to call, in times of a war with an unknown enemy, was often used as an alibi to attack attempts from media to broadcast and go to the source and talk to people and try to understand what was the real situation. We were asked to send questions beforehand and get recorded answers from the officials. This put us in a difficult situation to have follow-up questions in order to understand better on decisions that were being made, on what public should know, and having the information considered by different angles or all views.
When we talk about the decisions brought forward in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which were aimed at stopping so-called fake news, but were actually could be aimed to stop critical voices, I think that they primarily were aimed at stopping the forces, the pillars of the media community aimed at serving as a watchdog. So basically, if you bring forward decisions which are aimed specifically at stopping you being a critical voice, then you can no longer be the critical watchdog for the general public, which the media should always be, especially in a troubled and transitional country like Bosnia and Herzegovina is. I think one of the most worrying trends we have seen in relation to the COVID-19 crisis and the responses of the Bosnian government were that some of the measures adopted were aimed specifically at limiting media freedom. Specifically, I'm talking by movements very early on in the pandemic, where parts of the Bosnian authorities in Republika Srpska and the same parts in very local levels of government in Sarajevo canton made decisions aimed at stopping what they call the spread of fake news. In essence, experts found that such regulation was drafted so broadly in a sense that it could be used to silence critical voices.
During COVID crisis, media freedoms in Serbia deteriorated even more than they used to be. We are for a number of years now under a strong political, economical and safety pressure, and those pressures by the government became even worse than they used to be. My prognosis is therefore that after the crisis, most of the independent media in Serbia won't exist anymore. All of the basic values were violated during this crisis, freedom of speech above all. Any one of us who dared to criticize government and its bodies formed to fight the COVID crisis was crucified in pro-governmental media, and I think most of the journalists and media are actually became afraid of telling their own mind and their own attitudes.
Sigurisht që njëjtë si në gjithë botën, edhe vendi ynë është ballafaquar me pandeminë dhe ne si medium publik që nga dita e parë jemi munduar që t'u ofrojmë informacione të mjaftueshme qytetarëve të Kosovës sa i përket kësaj pandemie. Përveç tjera, përveç mbulimit të gjitha ngjarjeve, të cilat sigurisht që kanë qenë me interes për publikun, RTP ka pasur edhe emision të veçantë, ka trajtuar çështjet që kanë të bëjnë me pandeminë, pra në baza ditore, një emision 30 minuta, ku pranishëm kanë qenë mjek, profesor, njës të kësaj lamije, cilët kanë dhënë vlerësimet e veta sa i përket kësaj çështje. Asnjëherë Radio Televizioni i Kosovës nuk është penguar që të përçojë mesazhin, që të marrë informacione tek institucionet përgjegjëse, pra edhe tek qeveria, edhe tek ministria, edhe tek instituti, gjithmonë dyert për RTP-n, por besoj edhe për media të tjera kanë qenë të hapura në mënyrë që qytetarët jenë të informuar. Nuk besoj se është shkel ndonjë shtyllë e demokracisë, përkundër kësaj, gjithçka çfarë ka ndodhur është bërë publike, pra edhe sa i përket numrit, edhe sa i përket problemeve, edhe sa i përket atyre që janë të shtrirë në spital, por edhe sa i përket masave të cilat janë ndërmarrë nga institucionet përgjegjëse.
The biggest challenge that the media in North Macedonia faced since the pandemic started was the vast spread of disinformation and misinformation. False information was published by unprofessional media, starting from homemade remedies to cure the COVID-19 virus, then spreading suspicious statements from non-existent doctors saying it's just a heavy flu, leading to massive conspiracy theories like the virus was created in a lab and that with the vaccination humans will get a chip made by Gates Foundation. On the other hand, sometimes there were mistakes in publishing the statistics of the infected because some media didn't verify the number with the Ministry of Health, which still is the only credible source in giving those kinds of informations. Our team as a fact-checkers of Metamorphosis Foundation and me as an editor-in-chief of the online news site Portal B have since debunked maybe thousands of fake articles, advising the nation to check the sources of this news and dismiss it if they don't contain official statements from our ministry or the World Health Organization.
Remaining in the Balkans, media freedom was affected by both the virus and the authoritarian policies. The magnitude of state intervention in media industry is high and threatening to democracy. That's why I ask, how will media act differently at a time when the pandemic gives governments reasonable cause for tightening civil liberties as well as for controlling the message. What are the lessons learned by the media?
I consider number one lesson, and it's not because of the pandemic and COVID times, self-improvement. Being even more professional, trying to get to the truth when it's hard, when it's almost impossible, when it's costly. Quality journalism is difficult, it's expensive, it's much easier to copy-paste and publish everything online without checking it, but that's not media. That's not what a journalist should do. This is what I think was mostly learned this time, and we should take this moment to self-reflect, be critical to ourselves, to our work, to our job, and give more voice to people and especially to their concerns as well.
I think one of the very positive things we have learned in Bosnia and Herzegovina is that coming together of media and pressure and criticism, very strong stated one, can have an effect. So the instances that I've mentioned where authorities in Republika Srpska and Sarajevo Canton brought these decisions to limit media freedom have received very strong pushback from the media, and as a consequence we have seen large support from the general community but also from the international community, and that has resulted in the authorities pulling back these decisions. And I think that if we can take one positive from this is that actually the media, when working together and when coming together, can actually make a difference.
Janë shumë, po ndoshta është ende herët që t'japin një përgjigje sa I përket se cilat janë ato mësimet, mirë po besoj që e ka kriju një shoqëri, e ka kriju një kulturë, një mënyrë tjetës pak më ndryshe.
One of the most important lessons that we learned during the crisis is that we are doomed to act as guerrilla, as partisans of media freedoms. Not only in a technical kind of way, by using Zoom and other web applications, but also in our everyday reporting. We have to act as guerrilla, as partisans, and as someone who acts more or less against the ruling government.